When winter camping, having the right gear is essential, but even having the best gear doesn't guarantee that you're going to have this great experience in the outdoors. When it comes to planning a winter camping trip, especially if the snow is going to be deep or the temperatures are going to be very cold, there's a few things that you're going to need to know that will greatly increase your success. Now, it doesn't matter what your experience is. If you never even winter camp before, these tips are going to take you from surviving to thriving. Now, the first tip when planning this epic winter camping trip is location. Location, location, location. Now, your worst enemy when winter camping is wind. I'd rather be in a negative 30 degrees, which is negative 34 Celsius with no wind, than being in 10 degrees, which is negative 12 Celsius with heavy winds. Yes, you could put up a tarp to block that wind, but there's a much smarter and better way to block that frigid wind from cutting right through you. And that's being at a camp that's facing southeast with a lot of trees and elevation behind you to block that northwest cold wind. So when you're planning a winter camping trip, find those designated campsites on your map that are facing southeast to block that northwest wind. Now, besides blocking that northwest wind and facing southeast, when you wake up in those frigid cold mornings, you'll have that sun shining on you if it's not cloudy. And then with the south direction, you'll have that sun shining on you all day to keep you warm. It's amazing how that sun, when you're out of the wind, will warm you up throughout the day. Now, when planning a winter camping trip, break out those maps and look for those campsites that you're going to be staying at that are facing southeast to block that northwest wind. You'll be amazed how important this tip is on location. You're going to love it. You're going to stay warm and you're going to be out of the wind. Now, the next tip when you're planning a winter camping trip is distance. Now, during the spring, summer, and fall, you may do 10, 15, 20 miles. But when it comes to wintertime and the snow is deep, it's not going to happen. When the snow is deep, no more than 2 miles, which is 3.2 kilometers of hiking each day. If the snow is not too deep, then you can think about traveling up to 5 miles, which is 8 kilometers. But I wouldn't go over that. But always be aware it could snow unexpectedly and you could be trapped in. So it's always wise to plan those shorter trips, which brings us to the next tip is time. With the days being shorter, you want to leave enough time for you to set up camp and to do these camp chores like gathering wood, fire to cook your food. Or melt snow for water. Lower it over the fire. Now, because the daylight is less, you're going to want to process more wood because you're going to be up later. And also you may have to dry something out, but a fire outdoor is like a television set to a couch potato. Now, another part of time we need to talk about is when you're hiking in the wintertime or pulling a poke, you are doing a lot of work and you will sweat. So when you get wet or damp in the wintertime, and especially when that wind hits you, you're going to get chilled. So when you're hiking, you really want to slow it down, enjoy the scenery, take your time, and if you start overheating, start taking off those layers. Now, if you're not going on a solo trip and you're going to be with a group of people, the next tip is expectations. Now, what you want to do is get everyone together before you go on a trip and talk about what their expectations are, because we always think that they're the same. In most cases, they are not. And it's nice to talk about what your strengths and weaknesses are. Who's good at gathering firewood? Who's good at processing wood? Building the fire. This way you can have this teamwork going on, and it makes it so much easier and more enjoyable when you have all these people on the same page working together. Now, one of my favorite tips I like to share with you is improvise. You can come into a difficult situation that may arise, you assess it, you improvise, and you overcome it. And to give you an example is the last trip that I was on, my friend Runner and I were crossing this lake. As I was breaking trail, I noticed there was water underneath the snow above the ice, and it started to stick to the bottom of my sled. And Runner, following my broken trail, his was even worse. His sled was wet, and that snow was building up on there in that ice, and it made it almost impossible to move. And we had at least a mile, mile and a half to camp, and there was no way we were gonna make it. So what we did is we looked to the shoreline to see if we can find a place with bushwhack to set up camp, because you ain't going anywhere in this stuff. So we're gonna have to improvise. We're gonna see if we can get camping there for tonight. When we got there, we realized that about a half mile down was a campsite that offered great protection from the wind. So we decided to shoot for that one. My sled not being so bad, I took off, and when I got there, I dropped the sled off. I came back, and I took the equipment, like a pack, a bag that Runner had, out of his poke, and I put it on my back and carried it to camp, so his sled wasn't that bad. So you always want to be prepared to improvise in difficult situations and overcome them. This is one of my favorite things that I learned from the Marine Corps, is to improvise. It's amazing how you can come to a difficult situation and think it's terrible, but when you overcome it, you will be surprised how it really wasn't that bad. And you look back on it as a good memory. Now, the first 4 tips I shared with you is something that you do when you plan before you do the trip. And we just did one that was during the trip. But the last tip I like to share with you is something that you do at the end of the trip, and that's experience. Now, you can have the best gear and all the knowledge in the world, but I'm going to tell you something: experience is everything. It is king, in some cases queen. Now, each time you go out on a trip, you're going to gain more experience. The more experience you gain, the more confidence you're going to have. And after a while doing all these trips, you're going to find out that this winter camping is really quite simple, no matter how much snow or how cold it gets. Now, you guys, there's one thing that I always do after every trip, no matter if I'm by myself or someone's with or whatever the season is. On our way home, we'll stop to get something to eat, and we'll make an assessment of our trip, and I'll ask 2 questions. The first question is, what did you learn? There's always something that you learned on every trip that you do, and you take that and you carry it over to the next trip. And the second question is, what could we do better? Because there's always something that you can improve. There's something that didn't work, or there might be a piece of gear you think that would have helped on this trip to improve it. So always reflect on these 2 questions, and I guarantee you, you're going to gain a lot of experience. And with experience, confidence. Now, the last thing I like to talk about is stars. With the days being shorter and the nights are longer, as the night goes on, it gets darker and darker, and you go out on that frozen lake or an open field and you lay in the snow and look up, you'll be just amazed, awestruck of God's symphony of stars. It's just amazing. And let me tell you guys something, you like Academy Award winning shows, You ain't gonna beat that Academy Award. It's an Oscar-winning show. Now, I hope you found this video to be helpful and insightful. And if there's any tips that I missed or you'd like to share, or if you have any questions or comments, please write them down below. I'd love to hear from you. This is The Marine. Thank you for watching, and God bless.